Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on discussing the Lancet Oncology Commission on European Groundshot, addressing Europe's cancer research challenges. I am the deputy editor of the Lancet Oncology, Ali Landman, and today we're going to be talking about this commission, which launched just on Wednesday at the European Cancer Summit, with the intention to inform Europe's Beating Cancer Plan and the EU Cancer Mission by setting out a data-driven, patient-centered cancer research roadmap for Europe. And the call to action aims for an ambitious 70-35 goal, which is 70% long-term survival for all European cancer patients by 2035. So joining me today, I have the Commission Chair, Mark Lawler, Professor of Digital Health and Chair in Translational Cancer Genomics at Queen's University Belfast, and the Chair of the Commission. Also, Jolanda Levens, Chair and Professor in Radiation Oncology at Ghent University Hospital in Belgium, Teodora Kolarova, Executive Director of the International Neuroendocrine Cancer Alliance in the United States, and Edward Verdulak, at University Hospital Split, Department of Oncology in Croatia. Thanks, everyone, for joining me. We're going to be talking about, obviously, the Commission, the need for action, how to implement the data and the science, patient-centered research, cancer research in Eastern Europe, and Mark will end with a reimagining cancer research and its implementation in Europe. And then we'll have a Q&A. So you'll be able to ask any questions in the Q&A box that you see on your screen, and we will answer those, as many as we can, at the end of the session. So just before we start, a little housekeeping. As I said, you're welcome to submit your questions throughout the presentation, and you can use the box on your dashboard to do that. Also on the dashboard, you'll see a box with related resources, and there's a link to the commission there. So please do access that. You can adjust or minimize any of the boxes that appear on your dashboard to suit your preferences. So if you'd like to see just the slides, for example, you can do that. And a link to the on-demand version of this webinar, which is being recorded, will be emailed to everyone once the webinar has concluded. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Mark to go ahead and begin. Thank you, Mark.
Online from all around the world. Really excited to share with you the work we've been doing over the last two and a half years. Just reflecting on Wednesday with David Collinridge, the editor of Lancet Oncology, and how this all started. So Richard Sullivan and myself, Richard, I'm sure many of you know, first approached David, I suppose about 3.5 years ago now, with this idea of looking at really mapping out the European landscape for cancer research, but using that to inform a patient-centered, data-enabled approach to driving cancer right across Europe. And I suppose it's interesting because obviously at that time, we thought at this stage, by a year ago, probably this commission would be out. But obviously COVID had an impact on that. But it's actually very pertinent that we did actually wait, because our commission would have been out of date if we hadn't included the impact that COVID has had on cancer research and cancer care in Europe. I'd also like to thank both Ali, who was involved in this at the earlier stages, and then Marcia, who also, DeCosta, who was very much involved in bringing this over the line and being very patient with me in this regard anyway. So enough of the sort of reflection, just to go now in terms of what did we actually see. So I'm going to be very blunt here and say that Europe is facing really a cancer crisis. We know the impact of the COVID pandemic and also subsequent natural lockdowns. We'll also talk about the influence of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and also the global economic downturn. The message I want to get across to you is we need to act now. If we don't act now, this cancer crisis is going to challenge us for at least the next decade. And one of the things we did in the commission was very much brought together from right across Europe, 45 different commissioners, to look at challenging what we're doing at the moment and how we might do better in the future. So not saying everything is fine, let's just continue with the same old, but really look at something different. And our really approach has been data into intelligence, informing 12 recommendations. And I've said this on Wednesday, and I'll say it again now, data eats opinion for lunch. We need to have data-driven approaches, not people's opinion as to how we should do cancer research, but actually use data to inform what type of research we should be doing, what are the gaps, what are the under-researched areas. And that's very much reflected in our call for action, which is really reimagining cancer research, but most importantly, its implementation across Europe. And really, we've reflected on addressing the realities that are on the ground. So this is not shooting for the moon. This is firmly grounded in reality and what the necessity is for Europe at this moment in time. So hence the term Groundshot. One of the things that has underpinned this whole initiative and the data that's driven this initiative is to achieve a 70-35 vision. And that's 70% long-term. And by long-term, I mean an average of 10-year survival by 2035 for the 20 million people in Europe who are living with cancer at the moment. And that forms recommendation 1 of our call to action. One of the other things that the Commission has very much shown is that patients who are treated in research active hospitals have better outcomes than those who are not. So categorically, I can say that research is not a luxury. It is a necessity. It is an essential and an integral part of modern cancer care as we deliver it to our citizens. If we look at some of the data that we generated, and this is looking really at the challenge, particularly in relation to the cancer divide that unfortunately we've experiencing in Europe. And while people have talked about that, this is hard data that's showing the actual impact. What we can see here is just plotting the activity, cancer research activity in Western Europe, as in the EU 15 countries, as opposed to the EU 13, which are mostly the Central and Eastern European countries. And what you can see there is nearly a doubling of cancer research. A lot of cancer research is, in a way, is booming in Western Europe. But as you can see, a lot of stagnation in Eastern Europe. So we need to change that. What's really disappointing is this is despite the efforts that have been made in relation to the European research area over the last 15 to 20 years. So essentially, we haven't got it right. We need to look at ways in which we can change things, because unfortunately, this lack of research activity, and you'll hear more from Edouard later in the webinar, is going to have a direct impact on survival and cancer outcomes. We need really to invest in capacity building. We need to have directed funding approaches. We need to have twinning approaches, which really enhance the research activity, its quality, its translation, and most importantly, its implementation. We firmly believe that all citizens and patients, no matter where they live, need and must be able to benefit equally from advances in cancer research. The other thing that actually surprised us when we looked at it in terms of was the funding gap when we looked at the cancer research in Europe and in the United States. What we found was that in Europe we spend approximately €26 per head on cancer research, whereas in the US, and this is public funding, I should emphasize, and so public and charitable funding, the spend is nearly 10 times more in the US, €234. So one of the recommendations we have as a matter of urgency is to double the European cancer research budget to at least €50 per head by 2030. However, it's not what you spend, it's how you spend it. And one of the things we've very much emphasized, and we have the data to back this up, is to invest where the investment is actually needed the most. If we look at the aligning cancer research in Europe activity at the moment to cancer incidence and cancer burden, again, we find a mismatch. And we've really emphasized the importance of making decisions that are based on data intelligence, not opinion, no matter how expert that opinion is. We need to follow the data. We need to act on what it tells us. If we look at some of the more common cancers, but also some of the difficult to treat cancers, what we're seeing is that there isn't necessarily the focus that we would expect in relation to the disease burden and the research activity. Just pick one example, lung. It constitutes 21% of the disease burden in Europe. However, we're only actually concentrating 4% of the research activity and also our research funding in relation to this common disease that kills so many in Europe. And so we need to look at ways in which we can actually change this approach, because we really need to merit much greater attention on the likes of lung and pancreatic and colorectal, etc. Again, we've looked at this in more detail and gone through a whole series of different approaches in relation to looking at, for example, the spend as well is really important, and how that spend links with incidence and mortality for particular cancers. The other thing, I'm going to mention the B word, Brexit. Cancer knows no borders. And what we did was we looked at what was the research activity from the EU 28, which would have included the United Kingdom, versus the EU 27. And that's looking at the blue line, which is the EU 28, the green line, the EU 27. As you can see, there's a sizable gap. The UK is key to European cancer research. It's one of the powerhouses of European cancer research. So we have to forget about borders. What we have to make sure is that the UK must continue to collaborate with its European partners and contribute those high quality outputs to cancer research. Cancer knows no borders, neither should Europe. And the other thing that we've shone a light on is gender equality in cancer research, or rather the lack of it. We see very disappointing figures, particularly in relation to last author female publications in cancer research, which would be a proxy for research leadership. What we see here is that for some countries, it's down as low as 25%, the average approximately 33%, not good enough. Unfortunately, similarly, the situation in relation to research funding, which we also looked at, again, 65 versus 35 male research leads versus female research leads. But there are hope to be seen. What we can see there is in Central and Eastern European and also Nordic countries, we see a much better percentage in terms of last author female publications. We need to develop proactive mechanisms to enhance gender equality. We also need to understand it more. And our aim, again, is to increase female senior authorship from 33% to 45% by 2028. The other area that really we focused on a lot was prevention, screening, and early diagnosis research. We really see a significant mismatch in relation to funding. We need to shift the dial very significantly, increase spend on prevention research, fully implement our screening recommendations, eliminate HPV-driven cancers by 2030, and really embed new techniques that are state-of-the-art. But you can see there, the spend on screening, on early detection is simply not enough. And we would very much support, for example, Cancer Research UK's data-driven early detection strategy that they're currently developing. Research is a driver of better cancer care. We need to work together. I think that's very obvious to everybody. But again, we've shown data in relation to this. And what we've shown is that if we look at comprehensive cancer centres, they really are the drivers and the heartbeat of research and innovation and implementing that for better care. One of the things we're very good at in Europe is breakthrough and in terms of discovery science, but we're not so good at follow through. So we really need to look at ways in which we can leverage both infrastructure and expertise to be much more than the sum of our parts. 20 million Europeans live with or beyond a cancer diagnosis. And certainly the data also tells us that we are not doing enough for these cancer survivors. Survivorship itself is under-researched, it's underfunded. We need a European survivorship research and innovation plan. We've 3 pillars that we've identified in relation to this, the medical pillar, the socioeconomic pillar, and the political legal pillar. This has been done in association with the European Academy of Cancer Sciences. And the other area that's really important is avoiding financial toxicity. Unfortunately, many cancer survivors experience difficulty in terms of getting insurance, getting mortgages for their houses, because they have to declare a cancer diagnosis that maybe 15, 20 years ago, and they're actually cured of their cancer. This is not acceptable. And to give those 20 million Europeans a voice, we need a European Cancer Survivorship Day. COVID is something that we've obviously focused on quite a lot. The data that we've generated has been quite astounding, to be perfectly honest. We've seen, for example, 100 million screening tests not performed in Europe. Over 1 million people maybe have a cancer diagnosis that actually hasn't been diagnosed yet. So they may be walking around with cancer, but we don't know it. And we're in a race against time to actually find those people. But not only has there been an impact on treatment, on diagnosis, on screening, there's also been an impact on the workforce. So 4 to 10 of our cancer healthcare workers are suffering burnout, measurable, again, by our analysis, and 3 out of 10 are showing signs of clinical depression. And so we really need to look at ways in which we can, again, follow the data, use that data, shocking though it is, but use it to accelerate the research response and look at establishing near real-time dashboards of data that allow us to really look at ways in which we can address the backlog. If somebody says to you the backlog has been addressed, don't believe them. Backlog has not been addressed. Our data also shows that not only the data that was at the nadir of the pandemic, we're still seeing impacts in relation to data across Europe in relation to the impact of COVID-19. COVID-19 has not gone away, and it's still having impact on cancer services, cancer patients in Europe. The other unfortunate impact of the war on Ukraine has also impacted on cancer, and we had a session at the European Cancer Summit there just the day before, or just yesterday actually, in relation to this and how we can support our Ukrainian colleagues and stand as one beside them. We've set up a network, a European Cancer Organization, American Society of Clinical Oncology joint network on the impact of the war in Ukraine on cancer. One of the things we've done in relation to that is collect monthly data intelligence to see where are the gaps, shortages in relation to medicines, supplies, workforce gaps, and how we can help both in the neighbouring countries taking cancer refugees to treat, recruiting patients to clinical trials, particularly industry-led clinical trials, as is Russia. So you can see there the numbers in relation to low middle-income countries, but also in relation to upper middle-income countries. So we have a big problem here in relation to cancer research, clinical cancer research in Europe. And again, we've indicated ways in which we can address this. Finally, we need to very much not be insular. Cancer, as I said, knows no borders. We need much more empowering of European cancer researchers to drive an agenda at the global level, an equitable agenda with particular emphasis on low and middle income countries. And we have a number of targets that we've set because frankly, neither Europe or the United States are at the moment actually driving sufficient either funding, expertise or support and collaboration to low and middle income countries. And you can see there I've indicated some of the data that we've generated and also how that's informed some of our requirements within recommendation 12. So thank you for your attention, and I'll hand back to Ali.
Thanks so much, Mark, for such a provocative opening talk for this session, talking about the urgency of acting now and importantly, taking a different approach than has been taken in the past, because that, as you say, obviously hasn't worked and things have changed. And I also like your point about forgetting about borders. You know, we really all need to work together for this, to solve this cancer problem. It doesn't really matter where you live. It's about helping patients. So our next speaker is Yolanda Levens, who will be talking about cancer care implementing the science. So please go ahead, Yolanda.
Thank you very much, Ali, and thank you, Mark, for setting out the report so well. I'm very happy to be here with you today and to be part of this commission and to be discussing a few more specific key aspects of the commission paper. So what has already been alluded to by Mark is that at this moment, the cancer research portfolio is too restricted. We really have to widen the research portfolio. We have a very narrow focus on discovery science and biopharmaceutical research, and we really need to embrace a more comprehensive portfolio. We need to really be inclusive. That means generating scientific evidence on all disease phases. We have already been talking about the lack of or the limited research funding for prevention and early diagnosis, and also that there's a gap towards survivorship research. We need to embrace all cancer types, and the research has to be proportional to the cancer incidence and burden. And Mark already alluded to the example of lung cancer that is underfinanced and under-researched compared to its incidence and impact on the population. We also have to embrace all cancer, all modalities in cancer treatment and care, and that means that we have to go through the whole portfolio of treatment of patients, and that means also including non-systemic treatment interventions instead of mostly focusing on the systemic treatment agents. So we need a greater emphasis also on health policy and systems research, including implementation research, because we do have found in the report that very often, we are very good in having data available, but bringing it into practice and bringing it towards each patient who deserves these innovations is a more difficult one. So for that reason, we need health system research, we need implementation science. And so from this point, we need to create a more effective cancer research ecosystem and closing the gaps that we've highlighted in the Commission paper. And I want to point out that the European Cancer Organization has set up several focus topic networks, and that they focus really, they are aligned to the gaps that we've been defining. So for example, there's a network on prevention, early detection and cancer screening, and also on HPV action, which really wants to act on this early phases of cancer prevention and detection. There's a network on survivorship and quality of life. There's network that focuses on quality of cancer care. There's a network on health systems and treatment optimization that really wants to bridge the gap between optimizing the treatment and optimizing the health system so that the care can indeed reach all patients who need it. There's a network on digital health, and well, very topical, of course, for this report is that there's one on equalities. And on top of that, there's also two specific networks that have been created as a response to the COVID-19 crisis and the Ukraine cancer, the impact of the war in Ukraine on cancer care. So there's and I'm a radiation oncologist by training and profession, so I think I'm very well placed to also highlight that we need a more strong focus on non-systemic treatment strategies. If you look at the report, the five largest cancer research domains are genetics, prognosis, surgery, systemic treatment, and pathology, and this seems to be quite evenly distributed among leading high-income European countries. But if we focus a bit more deeply, and you can see it on this figure, well, this table, which is maybe a bit dense, but I would like you to focus on Europe 32 and look into that column, the percentages of cancer research papers published in each group. Then you can see that, well, surgery and most specifically radiotherapy lag substantially behind on the systemic treatment modalities, which is a combination of the chemotherapy and the targeted therapy. And that is in sharp contrast with the fact that 50% of patients with cancer have an evidence-based indication as well for radiotherapy and for surgery or surgery, and today they are the most effective cancer treatments. I think, and radiotherapy research is indeed underrepresented. And on the slide, you see a figure that actually comes from a previous publication, where you can see that, well, we know that radiotherapy research is less prioritized than research on other cancer treatment modalities, and particularly systemic therapy and precision oncology, as I've just mentioned in the previous slide. And this is related to the paucity of funding also for radiotherapy research. And well, as you can see on the figure that comes from another publication, well, unfortunately, also the topics that are addressed in radiotherapy are somewhat unbalanced. There is a very high interest in technical aspects of radiotherapy, also radiobiology, and also combined modality approaches and fractionation are very well represented in radiotherapy research. But unfortunately, the interest for palliation, which still represents a quite important aspect, of course, in many cancer patients, quality of life and health systems research or health services research is really underrepresented. But as you also can see on this figure, these topics, luckily, over the last years have been gaining interest. And then why is radiotherapy research less well represented? Well, this has to do with several aspects, I think, which are specific for radiotherapy research. First, I would like to highlight that trial-related publications only represent about 5% of total radiotherapy research output. And actually, it is well known that randomized controlled trials are very very often difficult to execute in radiotherapy. This has to do with, well, the complexity of radiotherapy innovations that can be very variable. And if we see the most input on or research output on fractionation or combination with systemic agents, that is because these are indeed the most easy to address in randomized clinical trials. But another aspect is that, well, research in radiotherapy very often requires high upfront investments for new technologies that very often have to be carried by the healthcare providers first. And there's also a very strong operator dependency. That means that there are learning curves, and this is not always easy to capture in clinical trials. And this is further intensified by the limited research budget that we've already mentioned. And also we find really a challenge of translating the evidence that we have generated in the clinical trials into the implementation into practice. So we really need a dual research focus, and that is one on treatment optimization to obtain the highest benefit for the individual patient, but also on how to optimize the health system to make it possible to have these innovations included into care and to bring the highest benefit also for society. And obviously this dual approach is not only limited to radiotherapy. So in the context of radiotherapy, we really think we need to go more into detail in value and evidencing the value of radiotherapy with a much more emphasis on what is a focus on the patient perspective. And we will discuss the patient perspective more transversely, more in detail with the next speaker. We also need to define much more clearly what are the endpoints that are relevant for patients being treated with radiotherapy. I think, for example, on the fact of organ-saving approaches or cosmetic impact of, for example, breast cancer preservation. These are aspects that very often are not tackled in typical value frameworks because they are mostly focused on systemic treatment strategies. And I think we also need to have a blended approach to evidence generation, including not only clinical trials, but also trying to learn from every patient, include real-world data in the evidence generation. And therefore, we have to collect radiation-relevant information, deploying data analytics and artificial intelligence. We have to inform use these data to inform developing predictive models on which approaches will have the most benefit to the patients, so that we can go more and more to this tailored and personalized approach, which is really key to the novelties that are developed in radiation oncology. And we have to inform the therapeutic efficacy and effectiveness in clinical practice by using these data. So what we really need to do in general, and this is really trying to focus much more on how we can make clinical research being implemented into practice. We have, well, our ability to convert research discovery into the therapeutic innovation in practice is really compromised by a lot of things, amongst others, the regulatory, the implementation, and the scale-up challenges. Health services research and implementation science are therefore really crucial, because we really need to find a way to translate what we've been finding and evidencing in research into practice so that every cancer patient can benefit from it. We have to find a sustainable and equitable way of embedding these interventions in the health systems. And we also have the obligation, I think, that afterwards to analyze the real world impact of these innovations in prevention and treatments that we've been implemented. Unfortunately, cancer research funders do not consider these domains really a priority, so we really have to reassess the research portfolio investments and the overall strategic directions that research has to take. And we have to find, I think, really new financing models for emerging innovation, and from that perspective, coverage linked with evidence development may be a very nice way to go forward. And we have to use bioinformatics, statistical and advanced data analytic skills and frameworks to drive a digital health agenda with data that are really deployed to underpin the research agenda and to implement it in the health systems. And from that perspective, I think we have to take into account that, well, for example, COVID has also learned us that we can really have a rapid access to data. And we have to have the same timely access to cancer data to inform research and cancer agendas. And we have to ensure high quality cancer data that are up to date. We are not helped by data that are 5 years old. We really have to have up-to-date data as soon as possible from all European countries, and they have to be made available for to research in compliance with national laws and the EU GDPR legislations. And I think in that perspective, it's important to highlight the work and the importance of the population-based cancer registries. The European Network for Cancer Registries comprises over 30 countries in Europe and more than 180 cancer registries. And very often they are a statutory requirement within the countries. And they are really there as a key enabling infrastructure to help us to bring a picture of the European cancer burden, to define the cancer inequalities that we see across Europe, to evaluate the effect of cancer prevention research strategies, and to monitor the effectiveness of the national healthcare systems. And so we really need to focus on health system to improve the patient outcomes. Health systems are really there to fund, organize, and deliver cancer care. And health systems and the cancer services and systems that are embedded within them, unfortunately, are complex. They are embedded in a wider political, economic, and societal context, and that we have to take that into account and use these elements as key elements to define the health system and its performance. Because at the end, the health system will define the accessibility, the affordability, the equity, and the outcomes that we can give to our patients. So we need a balanced research portfolio. Again, we have to stress this, that supports academic-led research, that is blending clinical trials and real-world data, and that includes health policy and health systems research with implementation science that is needed to prioritize and realize the greatest improvements in patient outcomes in each health system across Europe. And I would like to end with the fact that, well, no innovation improves patient care and outcomes without first navigating its way through the health system. So this is really core. So cancer research prioritization for Europe must reflect what is happening on the ground, empower a more holistic cancer research agenda, and safeguarding implementation of innovation across all of Europe. And with this, I'm happy to hand over again to Ali, who will introduce the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Yolanda, for such an interesting talk, highlighting the gap between the research that needs to be done and what is being done and what is being funded, and how to improve research and translate those findings into practice. So our next speaker, Teodora Kolarova, will be talking about patient-centered research. She says, the only way to go. So go ahead, Teodora.
Thanks so much, Ali, and thank you for the privilege of the floor. I'm really humbled to be here today to articulate the patient perspective. I come from a patient advocacy community supporting people with one of the less common cancers, neuroendocrine cancer. The International Neuroendocrine Cancer Alliance being a global umbrella organization uniting 32 advocacy groups from around the world, really. Well, we all know that cancer kills around 1 million citizens every year. What we've recently learned, though, is that 1 million cancer diagnoses have been missed across Europe just during the last 2.5 years with the COVID pandemic. Unfortunately, a high proportion of patients are diagnosed with late cancer stages, which of course compromises their treatment options and their prognosis going forward, leading to poorer outcomes that we don't want to see. The pandemic led to 100 million screening tests not being performed, so we can only think about the knock-on effect that would create in the long term. And unfortunately, the lack of attention and funding for cancer prevention research, for that matter, still persists across Europe. Despite many public health efforts, public awareness of warning signs of cancer still remains low. Just a snapshot over 2 studies here. There's been a pan-European survey of over 4,000 patients with cancer, which show that 30% of those whose cancer was detected outside of screening heard that they don't have cancer, sometimes on multiple occasions. The International Neuroendocrine Cancer Alliance carried out a global survey looking at the challenges to access to diagnostics and treatment in the neuroendocrine cancer patients. Not neuroscience tumor, but neuroendocrine tumor is what the slide should say here, of almost 2,400 patients and almost 500 healthcare professionals from 68 countries. And we only reinforced the finding that 46% of our patients had stage 4 cancer at time of diagnosis, with 44% being initially misdiagnosed and mean time to diagnosis taking 5 years. So how can we change this really? And we do need to change it now. We do need to conduct better studies to address patient pathways to diagnosis, especially in the context of the delay caused by COVID. We should acknowledge that primary healthcare professionals and providers should play a more prominent role really in the research agenda, because that's essential for successful implementation of early detection strategies, and we need those. And let's face it, it's only by putting patient-focused and citizen-focused and approved research at the heart of a pan-European cancer strategy that we're calling for that we can drive enhanced health outcomes. Well, the European Cancer Groundshot articulates a vision for cancer control and cancer survival in Europe, the so-called 70-35 vision. We know what that means. We'll look for cancer patients in Europe going through a 70% long-term survival by 2035, underpinned by research with significant progress on cancer control, better survivor experience, and improved quality of life. So we can only achieve that if we work together and effectively co-create, sharing best practices and embedding research and innovation into everyday practice, into health systems basically. That's the only way we can meaningfully support cancer survivors. Speaking of keeping the focus on the patient, the European Code of Cancer Practice is really a prime example here. It's a citizen-centered and patient-centered manifesto of the core requirements for good clinical cancer practice, looking to improve outcomes for all Europe's patients with cancer. It has been co-created by a team of patients with cancer, their advocates, and obviously the oncology professionals. It's now translated to 31 languages from the European continent. It was launched back in 2020 in September with Commissioner Stella Kyriakides supporting it from, let's say, the higher political level, and it's seen significant support across Europe. So you can see here the languages that it's been translated. You'll see those in a bit. But the European Code of Cancer Practice stipulates that every European citizen has the right to equal access, the right to comprehensive, vetted information at all stages, to ensure optimal quality of care and treatment, underpinned by expertise, so that the best possible outcomes could be there for the patients and their families. We need an environment of multidisciplinary care where shared decision-making is really a priority, and with the clinician and the patient discussing potential pathways going forward or ways to control the disease, we should realize that there are really two experts in the room. We need an ecosystem underpinned by research and innovation, understanding the priority of quality of life and the meaning that has for the patients and their loved ones, with supportive and palliative care being integrated throughout the cancer care continuum, where survivorship and rehabilitation are part of the medical, socioeconomic, and political agenda so that full reintegration can take place. So just a snapshot of those 31 languages that I earlier referred on, and you can find this on the ECO, the European Cancer Organization website. So essentially, the European Code of Cancer Practice empowers patients to really actively participate in their care rather than passively receive it. It does address the inequalities that many patients are experiencing, unfortunately, every day. And it is there to ensure that patients receive best quality treatment to achieve the best outcomes possible, no matter where they live. That essentially means embedding rights that patients should expect and require from their health system into European cancer policy. Again, zooming into the European landscape that the International Neuroendocrine Cancer Alliance Can Survey showed when it comes to patients rating the overall quality of healthcare that they receive in their countries, you can easily see that neuroendocrine cancer patients living in Western Europe, 80% of those rate the healthcare quality that they've been receiving as good, very good, or excellent. Well, looking into Central and Eastern Europe, though, every fourth patient there with neuroendocrine cancer rates the quality of healthcare they receive as poor, and a total of 70% rated as poor or fair. I think this chart speaks for itself. One of the priorities obviously stipulated in the European Code of Cancer Practice is research and innovation. Some of the research areas of grave need, coming from the patient perspective and for all the reasons that I've just looked into now, is research on prevention and early diagnosis. I think it's only 4% of the overall research in Europe that focuses on this currently, as the European Cancer Groundshot data shows. And a research and innovation strategy really for the 20 million Europeans who live beyond the cancer diagnosis. A strategy, a research strategy that should be systematically governed by patient experience data. Mark alluded earlier that patients with cancer who are treated in research active hospitals have better outcomes than those who are not. So our aim should be that all patients have access to research active hospitals, I think. Embedding research within the national cancer control programs is obviously critical to our future health and well-being, as well as making sure that all European countries have a national cancer control program for that matter, because unfortunately that's still not the case. Well, we need to recognize the role of data. Data should lead the way, really, when it comes to making change happen. And we should also recognize the transformative role of the patient perspective in data and informing choices. Patient experience data really should inform not only medical product development, but also regulatory decision-making. We call for clear guidance on collecting and submitting such data so that meaningful patient and caregiver input can be given the voice it needs. The Food and Drug Agency has developed a methodology for patient experience data generation and assessment that's well structured and placed within the system. And Europe, quite frankly, is lagging behind. So we have to act fast to create such a framework and make sure that systematic generation of patient experience data is an integral part of the proposed European Cancer Survivorship and Innovation Plan. So finally, what is it that we need to be able to optimize cancer diagnostics and care? We need to develop national care pathways, because let's face it, cancer diagnostics and care take place on a national level. They don't take place at a European level, and cancer knows no boundaries, but we should look to optimize the healthcare systems on a country basis, right? We should call for mandatory expert center referral and support resource capability to ensure effective diagnostics and treatment for the best possible care. These are all critical factors to achieve earlier diagnosis and optimal cancer care, especially when it comes to rare or less common cancers, which required improved symptom awareness, and we've seen many evidence of that, as well as highly specialized care. So just finally, we're here to drive change. We're here to act fast together today. I think the gaps are all very well mapped and assessed. Now we need to make change happen. The patient voice can be a disruptive force, and we should really join our efforts to make sure that a patient-centered approach to cancer research is there, because it's only that could make research, policy, and clinical practice speak to each other and work in the same direction. Thanks so much for your attention, and over to you, Ali.
Thank you so much, Theodora, for your talk, highlighting such an important aspect of this, which is the critical and central role of the patient themselves in their own care. I just want to remind everyone that you can ask your questions using the Q&A box on your dashboard. Please go ahead and do that, and we should have time to answer those questions at the end. So now we will move on to our next speaker. Oh, there's your thank you slide. Edward Vergiliak, who will be speaking on cancer research in Eastern Europe, underserved and not appropriately deployed. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Ali. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It is my great pleasure and honor to be today with you and to talk about this important subject. As cancer research in Eastern Europe, why it is so underserved and not appropriately deployed. So these are my disclosures, to leave you a couple of seconds to see it. And to start with is that, unfortunately, cancer is a global health issue or problem, but from the cancer point of view, Europe is very underserved, and you can see that Europe, with Russia in this case, represent only 9% of global population. But regarding the cancer, we do have about 20% of global cancer mortality. That means, obviously, that our population is not dying due to some other health issues, such as, let's say, infection disease. But on the other side, that based on rather old age of ours and solving other problems, we are facing even greater cancer problem. The epicenter of the cancer problem is in Central and Eastern Europe. What this slide is about is you can see that incidence of cancer is greater in Western and Northern Europe, while mortality is greater in Central and Eastern Europe. So mortality to incidence ratio, or number of patients that are going to die because of cancer, is much greater in Eastern and Central Europe, defining how underserved those patients are. Another reason why some politicians are using this info, and also where we have a division of the Europe, is economical background. You can see here, for example, GDP of different countries, and you can see that Central and Eastern European countries have a double or triple less GDP in comparison to our Western neighbors. So many times politicians are using this reason to define that we are not able to invest enough in cancer research or better oncology care. But the question is this true? So this is the slide that I have created based on that. So the question is about willingness or affordability. You can see that in average, European countries are designating 9.9, almost 10% of GDP or gross domestic product for healthcare. But in our region, we are investing less. So for example, Croatia, 7.2, Estonia, 6.5, or Romania, just 5%. So what would happen if we could invest or should invest equally as our Western neighbors? So in that case, per person in the country, in Czech Republic, they would invest 470 euros more, in Croatia 300 or whatsoever. So what that means is that I believe that affordability is not a question, but willingness. And we should change and invest more in order to gain more. So this is our recent publication from the oncologists where we compared mortality to incidence ratio versus health expenditures. And what we have shown is that in our region, we are investing about 3 times in average less. And based on that, unfortunately, our outcomes are about 10 to 15, even more percentage less favorable than in the Western Europe. So that means no money, without money, we cannot perform as good as they are doing. This is the example on the systemic therapy for the cancer patients. You can see on y-axis expenditure per cancer case, and on x-axis mortality to incidence ratio. And you can see that as more you are spending per cancer patient for systemic treatment, as better results you are achieving. And there is one country that is kind of out of order, and that is Czech Republic. Please remember this, that Czech Republic is spending similar amount as Croatia or Poland and producing much better results, or spending 2 or 3 times less than Slovakia with the same results. They are recently divorced countries. So question was, what is that reason? And one potential and most probable reason that we came up with is excellent database for oncology in Czech Republic, continuous monitoring and reporting that they are having. And that could be the reason how some other countries can perform better to invest in that infrastructure. So you would most probably agree with me now that Europe is divided not only politically, economically, but also from the cancer research and outcomes point of view. And unfortunately, Eastern European region is lagging in all those issues, and we have to do something, and this commission is about that as well. What we can do in order to involve all these countries to do best for the benefit of all, not only themselves, but as Mark nicely pointed out, world as well. So again, recently we published this article about addressing disparities and challenges in underserved patient population for metastatic cancer in Europe. But what this is about is that when you're looking who is underserved, who is despair, you can divide the reasons for that on individual. So for example, patients that are old age, living far away from the hospital or having comorbidities are less likely to receive appropriate cancer care or be involved in cancer research. On the other side, it's even more important to recognize systemic reasons for that underserved populations. And we have to think about our reasons, what we can change in order to perform better, such as, for example, how many clinical trials do we have in our hospital? What was mentioned by Mark and Yolanda. What is the quality of the staff? How good we are in multidisciplinarity work? Are we playing multidisciplinarity or are we living multidisciplinarity? So what is the usual reason for the underperformance is policy. So injustice in cancer and in cancer research usually is not science, technology, or genetic problem. It is policy problem, and we have to do that. Mark, Richard, and me at the beginning of the COVID crisis were thinking how to prevent what is happening today, how to prevent that one crisis would spill over in another, especially in the region of Central and Eastern Europe, where the cancer systems or, let's say, quality of the cancer care was already overstretched. And we, in our, let's say, paper or work, try to underline importance of managing cancer care during the COVID crisis in an optimal way. Unfortunately, what happened and what's mentioned by Mark and Yolanda is that looks like we didn't perform on the level that we should, and unfortunately, we are going to witness bad outcomes in cancer care in the years to come. So the question is, what is driving high mortality in Central and Eastern European countries? And as you can see here, many potential reasons, such as already mentioned multidisciplinarity or lack of national cancer control programs. And the key areas in relationship to this groundshot that we are talking about is lack of appropriately resourced and implemented national cancer programs, because one is to write a list of wishes, but another is to implement that. But also lack of cancer research programs and investments. We need to have a huge cultural change to shorten that gap. Look this slide, please. And you can see on the left portion the heat map about clinical trial research a couple of years ago from the clinical trials.gov organization. And you can see that a number of trials open in the Western and the Northern European regions or countries is much higher than in Central and Eastern Europe. And what we have calculated is that in average, 5 to 7 times more research is there per population than in our countries. And with, if we could have same number of trials, listen to this, we can improve our gross domestic product by 0.2 to 0.5% and outcomes significantly, somebody says from 10 to 15%. This slide is about research from regional files. You can see in the red circle that our region is producing less quality articles. So Mark presented that we are presenting, so we are underperforming regarding the number of articles, but the articles that we are publishing are less good and having less mean impact factor. And also already mentioned that we are not concentrated on the global problems that we are facing or the cancers that we are dying of, and domains such as palliative care or quality of life. So what is my vision is that, and what could be the way to improve situation in Central and Eastern Europe is to invest in the digital transformation, in the databases, to kind of have a marriage between IT technology and oncology. Our networks or our infrastructure is bad, and I believe that we are in excellent position with investment in that. So to follow up the destiny of every single patient, to learn from every single patient, to change the way how science is done, and to put our region in the global spot of the cancer research and knowledge. So my strong belief is that we have to do it, to repeat, to learn from every patient. The knowledge from every patient should not die from it, and to change the way how science is performed, and to be better and to help everybody. So to finish with is this slide that health and health-related research must not be seen as an expense, but as investment. So please see this information that economists estimated about 1/3 of economical growth in advanced economies in the past century could be attributed to improvements in health or of global populations. Research focused on the recent years have found that health contributed almost as much to income growth as education, or even more, that investment in the health improvements of $1 can be returned by 2 or 4 times. So please, we should remember that investment in research is not expenditure, but investment. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Edouard, for such an interesting talk about the reasons behind the inequalities in research and outcomes between Western and Eastern Europe, and how it's really a matter of investment and policy, and not other things that people want to blame it on, perhaps. And your idea of learning from every patient as we go forward, which is so important and speaks to what Teodora was talking about as well. Before we move on to our final talk, back to Mark, I just want to encourage everyone to enter your questions in the Q&A box so we can have a really vibrant discussion at the end of all these really important and fascinating topics. So that would be really great. We just have a few questions so far. Please enter your questions. So finally, we'll end with Mark on reimagining cancer research and its implementation in Europe.
We have a huge opportunity here. We have the opportunity to reimagine cancer research, but most importantly, its implementation in Europe. You've heard from my colleagues the evidence that we've provided that to back up our claim that what's happening now is just not good enough. It's not good enough for science, and it's particularly not good enough for our patients. We set out then to reimagine and to this call for action and to really have 12 what we're calling realistic recommendations for achieving impactful change. I'm just going to very quickly touch on them, not go into them in detail. You can go to the website, you can go to the link in terms of downloading the full commission. But I think you've heard from us that it's not the discovery science alone. Discovery science is great. I'm a big believer in discovery science, but we need to actually implement that discovery science. So what we're suggesting is that we need to double implementation science and research, health services research activity, so that implementation science is the new translation medicine. Okay, so that's really what we're saying. It's the second gap in relation to translation, and we need to really fill that gap. We need to make sure that all Europeans benefit from cancer research, no matter where they live. They should not be discriminated against based on their geography. We really need to look, particularly in Eastern Europe, at increasing cancer research, both capacity and capability. And I've touched on the ideas in relation to twinning, in relation to capacity building, etc. You heard about the distinct gap that we have, particularly if we compare with the US in relation to cancer research funding. So bring that up to €50 per head by 2030. We do have to mitigate the impact of Brexit. The UK is a powerhouse in cancer research. We have our role to play, and so we need to play that without fear of restriction in relation to working with our European colleagues. We have to enhance gender equality in cancer research. In some countries, it is just disgraceful, the levels, less than 25% female leaders in cancer research. That is simply not good enough in this day and age. We also really feel the importance of eradicating, for example, HPV-driven cancers. We need to see universal vaccination for both boys and girls in all countries in Europe. We need to look at ways in which we can deploy the excellence of comprehensive cancer centres so that they can be powerhouses for cancer research, but most importantly for its translation. We need to establish a European cancer survivorship research plan. As I said, those 20 million Europeans need our support, need research in those areas. And as I said, COVID has had a distinct impact on us, but we need to go beyond COVID. We need to understand COVID, and we're starting to do that in relation to its impact on cancer, but we need now to mitigate the impacts of COVID. And most of all, in Central and Eastern Europe, and as Edouard so eloquently put it, both from a health point of view, but also from an economic point of view, we need to make sure the clinical trial activity is maintained and enhanced. And we need to not be insular. We need to look to the world. We need to look to how Europe can play a leadership role in the world, working with low and middle income countries to make cancer a thing of the past. So finally, just to emphasize, data trumps opinion. Intelligence is what will bring us on the right pathway to deliver a better Europe, a better cancer research agenda, a better cancer research landscape that would really deliver for our patients.
Thank you so much, Mark, and all the speakers really ended on a really important, incredible note, a spur to action based on the recommendations in the commission. So we do have some time for questions for the speakers, and I can start with this one. I think all of the speakers spoke about implementation, which is such a critical part. I mean, you have tons and tons of data now on all sorts of gaps related to cancer research and to outcomes, different types of gaps. But implementing new policies on the basis of those data is really critical. But how does this research take shape? So, for example, to assess the efficacy of a drug, we do a clinical trial. But how can we assess health system performance or how well the implementation is going? So I don't know, Mark, if you want to start with that.
I can take that from the start, but happy for my colleagues to come in as well. Really, the emphasis on this is on implementation science, on using the tools and the technologies that we have to measure, to look at impact, to do audits, to actually see, to set goals like we've done in the Commission, and to use that really to drive so that we see real change. One of the things we talked about yesterday during one of the sessions at the European Cancer Summit was exactly this. And we do need to look at ways in which we can really enhance that health services research. We're just not doing enough of it in cancer at the moment. We're not using some of the techniques that are available in implementation science to actually enhance the implementation. As I said, and I've said this on other fora as well, we're great at discovery. We're not so good at follow through. So we're great at breakthroughs, but follow through is something that we need to do. So if we can change that vista that we're good at breakthroughs and at follow throughs, then I think we will really deliver for our patients. How many biomarkers have we generated that have then not gone into clinical practice? So we need to look much more at that integration piece. And I think the importance of audits. Audits are relatively cheap to do. If you compare an audit to a clinical trial, you're talking about sort of tens and hundreds of log folds difference, and looking at ways in which we can think differently and use that to really drive that sort of take up of technology and innovation into the clinic.
That's great. Yeah. Do you think part of the problem is that people get so excited about implementing something that they forget to put in place the measurement metrics or ways of even identifying whether what they've done has had any effect? And is there a way to make sure that that's included when you start using, let's say, a new device, or you implement something new in a hospital, a way of doing something?
Yeah, no, very much so, Ali. You hit the nail right on the head in relation to that. It's looking at not only saying this is what we're going to do, but actually measuring, have we been successful or not? What are the factors that have contributed to that? There are obviously going to be differences in different countries. So there may be sort of cultural differences. There may be differences in relation to systems, and we have to bear that in mind. But if we set out that sort of roadmap, that implementation roadmap, if you like, and you're going through each of the gates, that really is the measure of success. And the other thing is, we need to be bringing other skill sets into play. We're not looking at sociology. We're not looking really at it's very hard to fund them in cancer research. That shouldn't necessarily be the way. Where cancer research is a team science, and we need to be expanding the members of that team, and not sort of being sort of just focusing on one area, but a much broader sort of thesis, if you like, or a much broader culture. And that's, we need to really think about that. And we're putting that up to funders to think about that in this commission, and that we really need to think of different ways in which we fund, different ways in which we bring teams together and benefit from the expertise of each of the different parts of components that make up the whole. Happy for any of my colleagues to come in here as well.
Yeah, but Edward, go first. I'll pick up later on. Mm-hmm. Edward, go ahead.
So what I would add here on excellent response by Mark is that what I mentioned in one of my slides is that unfortunately significant minority of our patients, even in the research centers, are involved in the clinical trials. I'm talking about promiles of the patients. So what is happening is that majority, 99.9% of patients that we are not learning from are dying with knowledge that we could accumulate with them. Based on the information technology that we have now, we must collect all that patient's data in the systems, and we have to learn from that. Everyday world evidence that also we are not collecting and presenting is something that could change clinical practice significantly. So that change in approach of the cancer research, learning from every single patient based on the appropriate implementation of IT technology in medicine, oncology particularly, is of crucial importance. So what we need to do is to prevent those walls that medical field, I believe the medical field is one of the less developed as far as the implementation of IT technology in everyday life. We have to work on that more, and hopefully we are going to advance oncology outcomes based on that application of IT technology more than any innovation up to now, or single drug or improvement in whatsoever treatment modality we have achieved up to now.
I would like to add to that, if I can, Ali. I think indeed, as professionals, we really have the obligation in, as Edward points out very clearly, to learn from every patient and to really use all the evidence that we have at hand to improve the outcome of our patients and the care that we deliver. And I think in the UK, there are some excellent examples of that, of how through patient-reported outcomes and through capturing data from the patients, care delivered is being evaluated, and how quality improvement programs have been set up through audits and then implementing this. And I would, from the point of view of radiotherapy, as I'm a radiation oncologist, also want to, for example, give the example of SBRT in oligometastatic disease that was in the UK followed up in real practice, and where data were collected in a large set of hospitals in order to, in the real world setting, obtain data on survival, but also toxicity and outcome of these patients, and through which this SBRT has been implemented into clinical practice. And we have a completely comparable expertise in Belgium, where SBRT was not reimbursed, and that was a hurdle to bring it to the patients, and where we collected data across the country on patients being treated, and therefore could prove that the data that we were generating at a large population base was comparable to the more specific data sets that we can find in the literature. So these are examples that indeed, through collecting data in a broader scale at population level, you can really impact on the care that you deliver to your patients. And I've alluded to the central role, in my view, also of the on the cancer registries that progressively are spending more and more emphasis on not only collecting data on what is epidemiology of cancer in the countries, but also want to collect data on the treatment that is delivered, and really make data actionable so that we can improve the care to our patients.
If I may also add in, thanks so much to all my colleagues for the comprehensive replies, but from a patient perspective, really acknowledging the active role of patients, not only in participating in research, and of course it's very important that we capture the patient's experience across the board and really look into patient-reported outcomes, but there is also a very meaningful role that patient experts can play in designing research, in setting up the research agenda and really coming up with the endpoints that are really beneficial and make sense to the patients and those living with the disease. So that's something that I would like to highlight in this context.
That's great. Thank you so much. You all sort of highlighted the importance of data in helping us figure out where to go next. And I think that's an important theme of this commission. So we have a very interesting question here on how should we see this new European, so to speak, in the context of universal health care or universal health coverage. Sure, who would like to take that one?
Yeah. Really good question. I'll maybe make a start on that. Really good question. I think it's integral in terms of we've made the argument, and now we have the data to back up the argument, and that patients should expect to receive research and be exposed to the best research as part of their universal coverage for cancer and for other diseases. So it's critical that we maintain that. And certainly in our discussions with politicians, with funders, we've been emphasising that exact part as well. Just to cover one of the other questions as well, we've, from a political side, European Cancer Organisation has set up a Parliamentarians Against Cancer, both MEPs, but also national members of Parliament as well. And we launched that there yesterday. And one of the things we'll be doing is having those conversations. And we're already starting to have conversations with the different funding agencies. But as part of that, UHC has to be part of that agenda as well.
Absolutely. I think you've all touched on the idea of where politics and policy sort of interact with improving cancer care and research funding. And I think one of the questions here is what happens next to engage with funders, as you've talked about, funders and politicians, as you've talked about, Mark, to adopt the recommendations. And I sort of had a question for Yolanda on how do we incentivize funding either from governments or from other types of funders on these underrepresented areas of research that are so important, like local treatments like radiotherapy or survivorship.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. I think indeed, well, the problem of funding of innovation in specifically radiotherapy, but the same holds as well for radiotherapy to surgery to a certain extent, is that while the investments are very often by policymakers perceived, or even as at the hospital level, perceived as very big investments that have to be made at once and are difficult to conceive on how to address it. So I think it is very important to realize that, for example, investment in radiotherapy is an investment that is made indeed at some point, but will last for a decade or more. So we have to find systems that really can support the professionals in investing in these new technologies and supporting them in gaining also evidence and providing evidence that is beneficial not only for their private department but at a broader level. So I already alluded to coverage with evidence development. For me, this is really, for the non-systemic treatment strategies, a very important way of supporting providers in investing in innovation, but also making them responsible in generating the evidence. Because if you, as a provider, only are the only one responsible for putting the money down, it's very difficult also, if the evidence is not really as you expected, to disinvest in this equipment or in this program. So I think this should be a shared responsibility of professionals, obviously, but also from policymakers, and they should have a broader view on where do we want to go with cancer care and cancer research into our country, and which are the innovations that are potentially promising, and how can we support this research agenda by a combined effort between providers and policymakers, and making indeed providers responsible for generating data not only on the outcome of the patients and the outcome of the innovation in clinical terms, but also generating economic evidence, because at the end, it will be a combination of both that will drive the effect or the possibility of including these innovations really into the healthcare system. So I think we have to be more open to novel approaches to evidence generation and to collaboration between governmental parties, policymakers, and the providers in the field.
Yeah, and just to add to what Yolanda said, Ali, we've started now, and that's why we not only have generated the evidence, but we also have the 12 recommendations, and we've already started to have those conversations because we want this to be something that's proactive, not just we publish it in Lancet Oncology and then we all go back to our daytime jobs. This is not something like that. This is much more together, and it really is looking at ways in which we can change the landscape, and we're providing that evidence. And as Yolanda said, one of the areas we focus on and highlight within the detail of the Commission is the use of health economics and that sort of value-based care concept, and how research can help drive that value-based care concept. But people need to think differently. That's I think we're emphasising that if we just do the same as we've done before, we're not going to move the needle.
Thanks, Mark and Yolanda. And if I may reinforce that message, it really is by uniting all stakeholders' efforts that we can hope to achieve any change here. It's not an easy task, but as we heard many times today, and as you read in the Commission, we do need to act fast. We have all the evidence showing us that we're in the middle of cancer pandemic, and we have to mobilize our efforts to change that. So really involving all the stakeholders across the spectrum is the way to go forward with regards to implementing the findings of research, with regards to making innovation not a luxury, but really a must in the healthcare system delivery to our patients everywhere.
And yeah, maybe I can add something again as well. I think that as healthcare providers, we have learned over the years that we indeed have to communicate much more broadly than only communicating with our peers. And obviously that is in the first place very important to collaborate and communicate with our patients, because at the end, these are the ones that we want to give the benefit of what we are doing. But we also have to find this way in communicating with the policymakers. And in that respect, I think the European Cancer Summit that we have been attending the last few days was an excellent example of how this can bring together different stakeholders in the field, healthcare providers, but also policymakers, and a large representation of patients and patient advocates, and really bringing this collaborative discussion at a higher level. So I think it's very important to have this type of interaction and try to go beyond the borders of our own professional group, which we typically in the past were always tending to stay within, because that's comfortable. But we have to go broader, and we really have to communicate in a way that others understand the problems in the field. And I think that this report is a very nice layout of what there is. Now we have to really target in the coming period to make this also heard by policymakers in the first place.
Thanks, everyone. I think that really raised some really important points about how the Commission is just a starting place, really, but it's a really useful starting place for laying out the evidence and the recommendations of where to go next. But Yolanda, you make this point that as scientists, as clinicians, that we need to step out of our comfort zone and bring this evidence to people who have the power, the policymakers to make a change, to persuade them that this is worth making a change for, investing in, and that is very difficult, but such the critical action to do. So thanks everyone on that topic. We have another question here about prevention, which I think is really interesting. This has been a common theme for me of the sessions that I've been going to this week at London Global Cancer Week about how do we improve prevention? What is the role of clinicians, of policymakers, and of the cancer patients themselves, or just people before they get cancer, obviously, in making us aware of cancer, of the signs and symptoms, and the lifestyle risk factors.
Yeah, I'll be very happy to take that. Yeah, and thank you, Vanya, for the question. We placed a big emphasis on this. We did a lot of research in the prevention space, both in terms of the spend on prevention research, which is a disgraceful 4%. And we have a lot of data that we generated through the work that we did, particularly in IARC, on this part of the program. And that's simply not good enough. But also then identifying which areas of prevention research have been focused on or not. And again, we've brought out as part of the recommendations, a much more significant focus, a really complete mind change in relation to prevention research. One of the things that is challenging is the following: it's how do we get prevention at the national level? And I'll just give you an example. You won't believe this, but it actually is true. We have EU recommendations from 2003 in relation to screening. If we look now and make a measurement in 2022, so nearly 20 years later, we still haven't fully implemented those recommendations in all European countries. That, to me, is just not good enough. Our politicians and our health services in individual countries are failing us if that's the case. And unfortunately, it is. Our data shows that. What's slightly worrying, given the focus we've had on prevention, what's slightly worrying is there's a new set of recommendations that are coming out. We've been very much involved in shaping these recommendations, in looking, for example, in relation to particularly lung cancer screening, but also prostate, gastric, as well as really making sure that breast, cervical, and colorectal are much more effective than they have been in the past. And we were really happy about that. In the last 2 weeks, there's been pushback from the national, from individual countries in relation to watering down those proposals. I'm going to go on line here and saying, if we water down those proposals, we are going to lead to more deaths for European citizens. It's simply not acceptable to try and water down the proposals. And those proposals that we made were based on data, including some of the data from this commission. So it's really important. So I think prevention, there's an education piece we need to do with citizens, but also with researchers, because we need to be doing more prevention research with funders. And I mentioned again the CRUK's CT3 early detection program, which I think is an example of something that we should be doing and a way of doing things differently, and it should be invested in. And we're saying that those type of programs are the type of programs we should be seeing. But there's that political dimension, and it's that political dimension that is sometimes harder, and that's why we need to be looking at ways in which we engage with politicians at the earliest possible stage, influence recommendations at the earliest possible stage, make policy ourselves, be part of that. I think that's something that we haven't done maybe 5 years ago, but we started to do now. And again, that's why we sort of feel some of the things we've set out in relation to the Commission, by doing that much more robust engagement with policymakers and politicians, we hope we can make a difference.
I fully echo that, and if I may add on with regards to cancer types that are not screenable, and that would then rely on as early detection as possible, I fully echo the huge impact of education, of understanding the disease, of symptom awareness. So we do need more research to understand what goes wrong there in the diagnostic pathway, and really act upon addressing those challenges. Because we can't have, keep missing patients and sending them back home with cancer, and then eventually finding 5, 6, 7 years later that they're already in stage 4, that they've metastasized because the healthcare professionals couldn't pick up on the symptoms, didn't know what screening or tests, whatever, to signpost to. So this really, we can't see it going on anymore. We've seen it enough.
I think that's a really good note to end on, that we've had enough. It's time for change. But unfortunately, we reached the end of this session. So I'd like to thank all the speakers for their incredible talks. And I look forward to seeing all the action that takes place after this commission has been launched. So thank you all for your attention. The the recording of the webinar will be available, I think, soon after this is finished. So thank you again, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ali and everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for.
Best. Thank you.